Welcome, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Green Shakti Talk. I know that there are some people on the line that are unfamiliar with Green Shakti. So for those of you who are new to Green Shakti is a nonprofit environmental program founded by Sri Shakti Amma in 1996 in Peedham, South India. It grows and plants trees, over 1.8 million to date, manages 2 tons of waste each day with its zero waste management program, educates local school kids about all things Mother Earth, and so much more. So most importantly, really it's a collective committed to deepening the relationship between people and nature. Today's Green Shakti Talk is by donation. As many of us are aware, India is in profound crisis at the moment, and we're dedicating all donations for today's talk to Annadanam. The literal translation of Annadanam is food offering or giving of a meal. And in temples around India, food is offered at no charge to devotees and guests who are visiting the temple. But the temple complex is now closed, and there's a mandatory lockdown that's in place. The hospital at the temple complex, Srinarayani Hospital, is essentially overflowing with need. And even the guest house, Kamala Nivas, has been turned into a COVID ward. So from what we understand today, about 85% of the people who are testing positive for COVID-19 at the hospital. So people are suffering, and this is why it's so critical to support feeding people at Peedham. The feeding program delivers essentially to the most vulnerable in the surrounding villages in Tirumalakodai, and Srinarayani Peedham is offering about 1,500 food packages per day at the gates of the temple and delivering them to the villages. And a typical meal, just so you all know, a typical meal includes locally sourced rice, a vegetable curry, and a lentil dish for protein. And $5 supplies 10 meals. So when we say every dollar counts, we really mean every dollar counts. Thank you for joining us. Please spread the word widely and help us support India through this crisis. There is great need and the situation is dire. So now's the time to give. As Sri Shakti Amma says, utilize any opportunity for service and you will feel joy. It automatically creates good energy. It is the energy of peace and love in the world. So we'll make sure to put all the donation links in the chat box. It's through Divine Love World Charity or greenshakti.org. So please donate. So with that, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome the extremely multi-talented Argentinian Australian artist, poet, musician, singer-songwriter, actor, writer, Jessica Chapnik Kahn. Jessica released 2 solo albums under the moniker Apollonia. She is the author of the children's book Lenny and the Ants, and a deeply moving and raw poetry collection entitled MADRE, which we will talk about today. She is also co-author of the biography A Repurposed Life with Ronnie Khan. Most recently, Jessica and her husband Nadav enchanted us with their music at the first annual Sri Shakti Amma Music Festival, left us all clamoring for more. Totally mesmerizing performance. She is mother to 2 beautiful angels, Lev Vishnu Khan and Shemi Jayashri Khan. Hi, Jessie. Happy Mother's Day.
I'm feeling so emotional all of a sudden. What happened?
Yes, I am too. I think it's an emotional day and it's an emotional topic.
Yeah.
We're talking about motherhood and in all its forms.
Yes.
I thought we would start Oh, and I should say, I encourage everyone to put their questions into the chat box. We're happy to get to as many questions as we possibly can. I know that people are definitely waiting to ask you, Jessie, about your book and about your illustrations, and we will talk about all of that. But I do want to go back to the beginnings, because it was in your foreword to Madre, which I loved so much, you know, the first lines, and I'm just gonna take a moment and read them. Quote, "I began writing this book with my son at my breast in the first few days of his life. I did not intend on writing a book. There was no further thought from my mind. I simply began to understand his face by drawing him. I began to understand my experience of him by writing. We were being born at exactly the same time. It was an exquisite, difficult bliss." So we've entitled this talk Exquisite, Difficult Bliss. Those words really resonated with me, because isn't that life, really? Exquisite, difficult bliss. And maybe a few other words I would add to that. But why it works, I think, so beautifully in this book, it's because the poetry is really filled with delicious, fanciful contradictions. So can you set the scene? You know, how did you birth this book of poetry? How did it begin?
Absolutely. So 4 years ago, almost 4.5 years ago, I gave birth to my son, Lev. And, you know, you're expecting the stuff people tell you, the exhaust, you know, how you can't know what motherhood is going to feel like until you're in it, but you expect certain things, the exhaustion, the this, the that people tell you about. When Lev was born, I did not realize about the transformative inner journey that motherhood brings along with it. And, you know, when I say the exquisite, difficult bliss, and you say the contradictions in, you know, that are present in the book and that are present in life's experiences, I think with all of bliss, there's I call them unbearable tensions, these contradictions that you talk about. I guess in motherhood, they're bearable tensions because you do bear them. And it's this constant play, you know, with pairs of opposites in a way. You know, absolutely loving your child with moments of wanting to run, you know, and, you know, these bearable tensions, I feel like, I mean, maybe that's a part, it was particularly potent in those very early weeks of Lev's life. And I found, you know, the transition from just being a witness of your own life, you know, this is pre-children, you're a witness to your own life, you have people around you validating that life, you have your things you want to do and achieve and your sense of self. And all of a sudden, you become the witness to someone else's life. You become the witnesser, you know, and that was quite a shock for me, especially as an artist, to not have an ability to witness myself. Like there was no reflection of me. It was just him, you know, and with that came a huge sense of bliss, you know, of like disappearing, of like, wow, I'm not the center of the universe. I'm free from the shackles of being the most important thing in my world. That was so exquisite, you know, and so liberating to be like, you know, and yet with that came despair, the despair of just despair of the loss of all the things that were my own, you know, and the disappearing brings a sense of loss. And joy and loss and joy and loss and joy. It's a cycle. That's how I found motherhood to be, this cycle of bliss and despair, bliss and despair, bliss and despair. And I think that most of my poems and most of the things I've made since I became a mother are very much in that bliss and despair cycle.
So you're breastfeeding Lev Vishnu.
Oh, yes, that was your question. How did this happen?
No, but
sorry, I got called.
We'll talk about these cycles of bliss and despair because it's so beautiful.
So I found myself, needing a witness. I needed a witness, and your partner, everyone's just so busy flurrying around doing stuff for you, hopefully, that I'd find myself in the middle of the night, feeding Lev, and just this absolute, I could call it terror, I guess, and divinity, and it was, I had no other way to be there for myself than to just write down a line, of what was happening. Sometimes I'd waken it up and be like, can you wake up and watch me breastfeed? It was like I just needed to be a mirror, needed to exist,
Yeah.
or otherwise I would truly disintegrate, So these poems, I mean, I didn't even see them as poems at the time. They were just lines that I was jotting down literally on tissue boxes that were near me, and, crunched up wrapping paper of it, and I would just find myself writing them at all sorts of unusual times. The middle of the night was a huge one. Later, as Lev, as I started going out a little bit, just moments in the park, wherever I'd find myself. And before I knew it, I just had hundreds of these little reflections. My diary, in a way, little diary entries, my witnesses, my little love songs to what was happening.
And Jessie, how about the drawings that accompany the poems? How did they come about? And how did you draw them? Were you drawing as you were breastfeeding, or a little bit of everything?
Yes, I was. Okay. Not all of them, but yes, I was. I've never drawn in my life because I've never felt the need to draw. I mean, I'd never been compelled to want to draw. And this was the first time. I think so much of my experience was even beyond words, and that sometimes there were no words. I found myself, with a pen and paper, just trying to understand, literally trying to understand his face. I'd look at him and I'd see this jigsaw. I mean, I think this happens with babies sometimes because they're growing so quickly and they're changing, and you don't know what's happening and you don't know what you've birthed, and you don't know them. They are a stranger. I mean, some people feel a real sense of, I've known, they look at their baby's face and feel like I've known them I didn't feel that with Lev. I saw this little stranger that I had to, and his face was a jigsaw that was alive and moving. I couldn't make sense of what it was. So that was how I felt compelled to understand him. And I drew with my left hand. I am right-handed. I drew them all with my left hand.
Wow.
I'd read about that, a while back, about, just to detach from that cognitive, this is what a hand looks like, this is what a nose looks like, and the way we judge. And I knew I'd judge, a drawing. So I just did it with my left hand. It was another kind of blissful experience because you have no judgment when you have no expectation, of a part of yourself. And it was just, however the nose was, that was the nose, and it was gorgeous, and it was naive, and it was tapping into some part of me that almost was Lev, the very childlike part that had never been told what something should look like, should be like. It sort of reflected the way it taught me lessons about motherhood too, of like, this doesn't need to look like anything in particular. It's your thing. And it's a free, it's an artistic experience. So the drawings were incredibly liberating for me, and a lot of them drew on, I think, dreams that I was having at the time, very potent dreams that you often have in very, very early postpartum, and mythology. I'm very much into mythology, and I was understanding the myths in different ways because it's such a primal, you know, to give to birth is such a primal, mythologically rich experience.
So we'll show those drawings in just a moment. I just thought it was interesting. I was speaking to a good friend of mine today who's a writer and a mother, and she was saying that poetry is so well suited in some ways because you have these snippets of time, right? Time that is no longer yours, right? You don't have that autonomy anymore. And poetry in its own right, it's just intimate and it's immediate and it's insightful. And it's really also well suited when you've reached your limit, right? You're just kind of pushing past those boundaries. So it's this interesting vehicle of exploration.
Yes. And how in how many lines can I capture this exact moment in the 30-second window that I have going on right now, you know?
That's what I mean. Yeah. It was, and once we read your poems, I think they are these kind of outbursts of liberation. It really comes across that this is your time to speak, and the combination of the poems and the drawings, they really do communicate some kind of ancient truths, like going back to your love of mythology, right? And creation stories, so to speak.
Yes, creation stories are a big thing for me, yeah.
What, you know, there's also a bit in the foreword, a beautiful story about your fears of motherhood, and how you were in India.
Yeah.
And you spoke to Sri Shakti Amma about some of those fears well in advance of your pregnancy. Can you talk a little bit about that exchange?
Yeah, I think I felt teary at the beginning of this, you know, when you were talking about India and what's happening there, because India has been such a big part of this mothering journey for me. I always had this idea. I think I picked it up somewhere along the line from my mum, that once you had kids, your life was pretty much over and you couldn't do anything ever again that you wanted, you know. So I waited a long time and I just thought one day I'll be ready, you know, and that day just felt like it was like never ready enough. Like it would just, you know, the years would pass and there was another record I was making and there was another tour and there was another thing that I was doing, and it was like, well, I'm never going to want to stop this, you know. And I had a couple of trips, you know. I've been going to India for almost 15 years now, every year. And I had a couple of trips where I met up with Amma, this teacher that we visit, and Amma just straight up asked me about motherhood. When's it happening? What are you thinking? I was just like, oh, mother. I mean, I'm just, I remember saying, you know, it's a weird thing when I think about that conversation. You know, those conversations sometimes with Amma, they become like this dream-like.
That we can't recall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, I'm not sure, this is going to sound weird, I'm not sure I love living enough to bring a child into the world. That was the first thing that came out of my mouth, in the sense of like, I'm frightened of this world. I'm frightened of what we're coming to, and how will I show a baby, you know, what exactly am I showing? I'm frightened of pain, I guess. I'm frightened of suffering, and I'm frightened of what there is to show. And I'm frightened of myself, and that I'm not cut out for this, and that I don't have some mechanics, you know, internal psychological mechanics that you're meant to have, like a real desire for a baby and someone who's been wanting them always. And I just hadn't thought about it in that way. And Amma said to me, but you're already a mother. The men are mothers. Look at the ants. The ants are mothers. If the ants can do it, why couldn't you? Even the men are mothers. Even the men are mothers. That really, it's something that I think about a lot. You know, because when we talk about mother, we think of our mothers and of women, and of course that women birth us. But I play with that. I often turn that, even the men and mothers, like a little gem in my hand with all the facets. Like, you know what? Wow, that's really beautiful, you know. And where is mother where is mother within us all? And with my poetry, I've thought, you know, when I'd receive, you know, thoughts from men who have read, it's really special to me, you know, because I think we're really talking about the mother within us all, you know, when we're talking about mother and motherhood. I don't think we're just talking about a woman that has birthed a baby, you know.
Yeah.
I think that it's such a bigger, we all came from a mother, and mother is within us. How could she not be? So that conversation with Amma really, you know, was the beginning of, you know, of me considering I'm already a mother. That's within me. That's already began. I was born with mother within me, and I'm already doing it. So I'm okay. Like I can, you know, and from that day on, I remember saying to Amma as well, that I was extremely frightened, and didn't think I could get over the fear. And Amma said, just every day put a little drop of a good thought about motherhood. When you see something beautiful, just like a little drops in a glass, and you'll see that eventually there's a whole full glass of drops that are nourishing water for you.
Wow.
Yeah, and if I probably
Poetry.
yeah, totally. You know, the simplest things. It's in the simplest things, isn't it? But I did that. I would see things and I'd be like, I'd remember that's a drop in my glass. And you know, by the next time I saw Amma, I remember saying, I'm ready. I'm ready. And I felt, you know, and that's the chapter, you know, well, to me it was about to begin, but in a way I feel like it had always begun, you know.
So why don't we take a moment, and on that note, take a look at some of your drawings, and maybe you could share some of your poetry. I did not realize that you drew them with your left hand and you're right-handed, and I find that mesmerizing.
Yeah.
And I think it's really for that reason that they affected me so deeply. This is the cover of Madre. And I just included a few images of the book itself. And I know that there's a link to the book in the chat box. But I wanted to show this because it's just beautiful. The book itself is incredibly beautiful. Both the illustrations, the quality of it, and in combination with your words.
Yeah, well, that was, you know, the fantasy of printing the book in this very limited format. There's only like 350 copies that will ever be done in this exact way. The fantasy was the best of, you know, the embossed and the best paper and the best, you know, I just thought this has to be made in the fantasy way. And I'm so happy that we did.
So one of my favorite poems,
Yes.
maybe you could share this one with us.
Yeah, I'll read it out to you. It's called Mother, You Are the First Guru. Mother, you are the first guru. From an ocean of milk you extend. pretend you have no idea yet what it means to be everything. That's got the traces of India in it too.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And a lot of the drawings also really bring together both kind of the Hindu and the Jewish aspects of you,
Yes.
and the love of mythology as well.
Yeah, and
Again,
the Catholic too.
and the Catholic too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, my upbringing
to all, which is
yeah.
yeah, I loved this kind of emerging, really very strong, this emerging from that ocean of milk.
Yes, the very luxury.
This, yeah,
Yes.
it's like reading a puja.
Yes.
I find that a lot of the poems and the drawings, it really makes for a kind of synesthetic experience, right? And I found that really interesting. My own response to it, all of my senses were really activated.
Okay.
What are we looking at here?
This is Lev's little holy feet. Yeah, that was another surprise, you know, birthing a baby, that the experience of perceiving something, contemplating a living being as with such awe and holiness. Everything he did, everything he touched, every part of him was a sublime experience. And I remember looking at his feet, and, again, because of my experiences in India and knowing that, in Hinduism, touching the feet of a guru or a saint is such, there's all sorts of ideas that I said about that, like, your karma is cleansed, clean, and, or the blessings that come with touching the feet of a guru, or Jesus and the washing of the feet. There's so much religious stuff around the holiness of feet and the humility of feet. And I would look at his feet, and all those things would come rushing back. It's like, I'm touching his feet. This is a holy experience. And inside of these feet, this particular drawing is a bit like in Hinduism, how the cow, often is shown with all the different deities, because the cow is perceived as such a holy animal in India because of the milk that she provides for humans as well as her own babies. She's often drawn with the deities, where the deities live within her body. She is housing holiness. And again, these feet were sort of stream of consciousness, but I drew figures and images of things that were embedded in my mind. The turtle, which is considered one of the first incarnations of Vishnu, which is again in the Hindu system. The lotus, which is so holy, in Buddhism and Hinduism. The Magen David, the Star of David, all these holy symbols, mother of power, of energy, of beauty, of goodness are within him. Yeah. Oh yeah, and this is the original sketch. Like this one, the mother in the belly of the whale with the baby in the belly of the mother who's in the belly of the whale. I grew up reading the Bible over and over again, and these stories are just a huge part of my consciousness. And in those nighttime, those postpartum midnight dawn, poetry moments, I remembered the belly of the whale. You know, I remembered what, you know, that whole story of Jonah in there and the sort of transformative experience that had to happen for him in that tale, in the dark, in an unknown space, you know, in such enclosure, but sort of a liberation of consciousness at the same time without knowing it for him. I guess that's the thing about birthing. You start understanding concepts that you've held your whole life, but you actually experience them. And I was having these sort of, you know, these things that you know with your intellect, but then you put yourself in them, or it puts you in them. And maybe this is how they were written. Maybe this is how someone, you know, crafted that story because of these experiences. So here I am, I guess, you know, mother in that transformative, isolated, it is isolating experience in the whale. And baby is too, you know. And that lotus growing from the navel, which is, you know, Lev's middle name Vishnu, which is part of the Vishnu mythology in Hinduism, of the Vishnu in his dream state and the lotus growing from his navel.
And
Yeah.
the lotus which grows out of muck.
Yes, exactly.
You know, to reveal such exquisite beauty.
Yeah, and in that, and in this sense, the umbilical cord is that lotus. So it's actually the lotus in us comes from mother, you know, is how I was. Oh, this is my this ended up being my end pages. Again, literally just trying to understand his eyes. And when I had nothing else, this was a type of meditation for me where I would just draw his eyes over and over. I have pages and pages of this, Sonya, of just drawing eyes.
It really is extraordinary. Yeah. And at every breastfeeding session, Jessie, you would just,
you know, not every, but sometimes it was just putting him down and, you know, putting a baby down to sleep, and you actually don't know what, you know, sometimes you're hanging for that, and then when you do, it's like, I don't actually know what I do with my time. I don't actually know what I do now, like apart from eating. It's like, do I exist here? And so it was so foreign. You know, I've had a second baby now, and you don't have that many of those moments because you already birthed mother previously. You know, you know who you are within that scheme. But with the first, you really don't know who you are inside of it. And that kind of meditation was exactly what I do in moments like that. This is Vishnu again, but I've called him baby Vishnu. And again, me exploring that experience of looking at something holy, you know, and that, you know, in Judaism, that the whole messianic idea that there's a perfect being that will come and save us. And, you know, from a couple, you know, from the mystical Jewish perspective, that Messiah is within each one of us, that liberated consciousness. And, you know, in a way, Lev became, it was an experience of deity. It was an experience of, okay, this divinity was within me. This divinity is me. This is the birthing of the messianic experience, you know, within me. And drawing him as, you know, his namesake, and exploring, you know, the aspects of Vishnu, who is this very sustaining, very nurturing God in Hinduism, was so powerful for me.
And I should mention, Jessie, that I found it absolutely phenomenal that you were giving birth while Sri Shakti Amma was consecrating the Vishnu temple.
Yes. Yes.
Which I
This
think
was-
is an important addition.
It is, isn't it?
To the story. Yeah. An
Absolutely.
interesting element, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes,
Of
absolutely.
destiny. Of destiny.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll read this one for you. The Holy Spirit is a broken woman. The Holy Spirit is a broken woman who makes our bodies wise. She rests so quietly on our flesh and speaks through the soft of our thighs. Yeah, again, that's oh, I do love all things Catholic.
yeah. I love that you spoke about the Holy Spirit too.
Yes.
And she's
yes.
the Holy Spirit as the ultimate nurturer, really. Yeah.
You know, in again in Jewish mysticism, in Kabbalah, you know, there's this presence called the Shekhinah, which is the feminine aspect of the divine. You know, in Kabbalah, God is both masculine and feminine, and she is essentially the Holy Spirit. That's not, you know, you're not going to go to synagogue and hear that probably, but you know, if you study with some Kabbalists or scholars, there's a lot of talk about this feminine presence, and she is the equivalent would be the Holy Spirit from a more Christian perspective. Yeah, so I love the intersection of all the traditions.
Yeah.
You know?
So here's an example of that incredible Mother Mary in Catholic inspiration.
Yes, this one is called Our Lady of the Sacred Lev. So Lev, my son's name, means heart in Hebrew. So Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, which was something I did grow up with, knowing about. I understood in a completely different way. Our Lady of the Sacred Lev, you know, it's like the mother that created this heart with her body, births this heart with her body, and this heart goes on to shine in the world and live and breathe and serve and experience, and it is hers, and she gives it away, you know, in a way, but it's always with her, and it's always with him or her. And yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know this, you know, a lot of these Catholic images, you know, throughout my life, I was mesmerized by them, not really knowing why, you know, even as a little girl, what did this mean to a little girl? I don't know. I was just mesmerized by Mary and Jesus. And now I realize, my God, I was looking at Mother, the mother of all mothers, you know, the symbol of all mothers. I mean, it's really profound that we have these images in our religions of Mother.
Mm.
And a lot of these images as well, Sonya, and a lot of the poems, I was, you know, I was never the kind of mum that could manage to take Lev to cafes or walk. I was not really good at that. You know, I stayed home with Lev for months and months until I finally came out, and I ended up, you know, walking to a park and sitting quietly with him. And one of the big things we did was walk to a local church. It had the exact kind of, it was the exact kind of place that I needed, not the noisy cafe, you know. My nervous system could not handle that so much. And we'd sit there, and, you know, it was cute because next to it was a synagogue, and we'd walk past and be like, Shabbat Shalom to the security guard, and walk into the church. I think he was like, who are these Catholic Jews?
Catholic Jews. Yeah.
We walk into this Catholic church, and often Lev would nap or whatever, and I'd just sit there I was being, it was like an art gallery. It was like my art gallery slash, cathedral. I'd sit there and there was a mother and her child staring back at me, and I'd just hold Lev, and a lot of these drawings happened there. A lot of the poems happened there. And then, Lev would wake and we'd light candles and we'd run around and we'd look at, it was beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, and quiet and ceremonial. And
yeah, I mean, you walk around and look at the Stations of the Cross, and it's like, it's all there, everything you're living, the passion, the despair, the bliss, the sacrifice, the ecstasy. I was accompanied by all of it in those little excursions that we had. And Lev would, as he got a little older, when he was 2, it was so wonderful. He'd say, who is that? And I'd say, that's called a symbol. It's a symbol of a mother like me, but of the whole world. And that's a baby like you, that is the symbol of all babies. And he was, real awe was born in him.
Stunning.
Yeah.
So this is what you were referencing to, the angel within the cow, the deities within the sacred cow. I just love this drawing.
Yes, this is I guess in Hinduism, the Gomata, the sacred cow, the mother cow, who looks after the world as well as her babies, and a beautiful reminder as well that even when we're just focused on our lives, on our home, on our children, we are there for the world as well. Again, the whole symbol of the cow, of, I've been to so many pujas for the cow throughout the 15 years in India, these ceremonies that are done in India where you honor the cow and what it offers. And again, I understood this whole thing in a different way. Wow, the mother within us all. Again, the mother in men, the mother in children, the mother in me, that is there for one and is there for the world. And again, this is a sort of stream of consciousness drawing again, where Lev was so heldly tight within me. So I guess I'm the cow in this pic. And
I love that in so many of the drawings you have this wonderful kind of opened third eye, right?
Yes.
Children who are the closest to the divine have that incredible vision.
Yes. And Vishnu as a deity, he always has that. I've always been fascinated by that. I can't remember the name of it, but how with Vishnu they put that third eye square in the middle. And actually recently in a trip to India, I asked, what is that? I asked one of the priests, because I really could never find it in any literature or anything. Why does Vishnu wear that? And the priest said to me, that is his consort. Lakshmi lives there. I just, again, it was like Judaism came back of like, tefillin, this ritual that there is in Judaism. You put this thing on your third eye, and it's a box, much like the one in Hinduism, and it's the feminine, it's the Shakti, it's the Shekhinah, it's all these, it's mother, the vision of mother always living in our consciousness. And that's why I would try and draw Lev without this little, I try to draw these babies without this little third eye thing, and I'd be like, no, this time I'm not going to do it, and I just couldn't. I had to put
it comes back.
Weary Eden. I am 2 shriveled fruits with many branches. He hangs off me, sucking, laughing, crying, milk dripping like tears. He becomes everything he needs to be in my weary Eden.
Exquisite bliss.
Yeah.
Difficult, exquisite bliss.
Yep. This is I think it's fair to say, a little obsession with Eden, with the creation story, the biblical creation story of this garden, you know, where the first man and the first woman were made. I have found, you know, through parenting, this image of the garden comes into my mind again and again and again. Because, you know, what I was talking about before, that you were talking about the contradictions, and, you know, that's what the garden is. It's this, you know, pairs of opposites that we eventually had to eat from the fruit that taught us pairs of opposites, good and bad, white and black, you know, all these, you know, sexual knowledge, all the things that happen in the garden. And, you know, watching Lev, it is a real life experience of watching first man, you know, it's like you're watching Adam be born and watching him get closer and closer to that fruit and eat from that fruit and start understanding the world, start naming things, start asking, you know, Lev now, you know, it's been a while that he's been like, is this good? Is this bad? Is this dead? Is this alive? Is this, you know, and it's extremely divine and extremely painful to watch innocence before you, having to know, you know, having to become aware of itself, of its nakedness. And, you know, it takes you to your own Eden, you know, where's my innocence? How was my innocence? You know, what was my journey? And also to the understanding, which is another Kabbalistic idea that I'm extremely fond of, that the Garden of Eden, we weren't exiled from it, we're in it. We're in it. The only thing that's been exiled is our understanding that we're still in it. You know? And how do we bring, you know, become aware that we are in that perfect garden, which I guess is what many of these spiritual practices are trying to take us to. Can you live in such presence that it's all perfect, you know, even though you know, you know. So yeah, this image of the garden, it's just, you know, and the beauty of creation stories, it's that they never end. We're still being created, you know. Lev's being created every day. I am too, until our deaths, we're being created. And so I'm completely lit up by creation stories, and particularly the garden.
One of my favorite poems from the book is very short, but you ask, why is your divine light not enough to extinguish my deepest dark?
Mm.
I wonder if you can just talk about that for a moment. Again, back to our contradictions and
Yes.
dualities and
Yes, I think that poem, again, if we look a little bit into, I guess, the Hindu mythology part, it's that real awareness. Well, first of all, it's a cry for, you know, you sort of think this thing is going to be this perfect experience, and then it's full of light and shade, and a lot of shade and a lot of dark bits. And it's like, what? You know, it's quite a shock. But again, looking from, this is where mythology just supports us and helps us so much, in that there's this concept of the dark mother as well, you know, which is in a lot of the deities in Hinduism, but you know, even the dark Madonna, the Black Madonna in Catholicism, the aspect of mother that is a darker light, a dark light, actually. And again, drawing on Kabbalah, there's this idea that dark light, illuminated dark, or the thing that is darkest, is the holiest. because it is further in the, it's dark because it's further away from our meager sight, and befriending this darker aspect, this darker mother, this side of a light that we don't understand. Illuminated light is just a lovely way, often described in the goddess Kali in Hinduism, because it is illuminated. It's just not, we don't perceive it as light filled, And, with that poem, why is your divine light not enough to extinguish my deepest dark? I think the understanding, even within that question and that, painful question, why am I now healed kind of thing, is the knowledge that this deepest dark is even holier. And that's the cycle of that poem, that in the pain of asking it, the answer is there too, that this deepest dark is something to behold and something to honor and something to write about,
Jessie, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but I would love, now that we really got a sense of the poetry and the drawings, I would love to hear one or two of your favorite poems.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you could share with us, and then we'll get to some questions.
Yeah. Well, since we were talking about mother and, mother, we were talking about mother, the darkness, I'll read this one, which recently has, now that with my second, which has been a very different experience, but a lot of the poems have popped into my mind in a different way, in a completely different context. And this was one of them that just made its way, that I hadn't, from the moment I wrote it, I hadn't thought much, it went in the book and I never thought about it again. And now it's like, oh yeah, I get it. It's called Mother in Your Heart. Darkness is a higher light, a delicate beckoning, a bitter closeness that conceals your face and sets you apart. It should happen to you. It is not wrong. Look, it is Mother in your heart. Yeah, that one's becoming one of my current faves. I'll read you Sonya. I always read this one at poetry readings, just because I think it encapsulates a lot of the experience of mother. The loneliness is deep, it's called. The loneliness is deep, even in my happiest moments with you. The days are short, but the night hours burn like prickly flames that have no warmth or kindness. I want to be held, but now my arms are for holding. I want to ask, but now my voice is for answering. I bury my face in your neck, in your clothes, in your hair. Loneliness never smelt so sweet.
That's one of my favorites too.
Yeah, how we were talking about, well, I was eagerly going on about the disappearing at the beginning of this, the disappearing that happens with particularly postpartum, but I've been thinking lately, and with Mother's Day, it's just an interesting thing to consider that, for something to, and again, going to, I hope that's okay, Kabbalah is very much always in my consciousness, and there's a beautiful, the creation story in Kabbalah and this mystical Jewish idea is sort of different to the garden. There's another one where it's just, there was a presence, in the atmosphere, a divinity, and it wanted to know something other than itself. And in order to do that, it had to contract. It had to contract and create space for something else to enter. And that's what God, the divine, did. It contracted and it created a space, and then was able to create the first man. And that contraction, which, we call it contractions in birth, but that contraction just to even have the thought, that going back to that conversation with Amma, just to have the thought of becoming a mother. I knew a contraction needed to happen, that I would cease in the way that I knew myself, that I would become smaller. That just the thought of that was scary. Your body then has to create this space to fill a child in you. I find that, and in a way, that contraction is you have to disappear, to a certain degree. You have to allow yourself to disappear. And, every single one of us, whoever our mother was, however good you thought they were or bad they were, our mothers disappeared, for us on some level, whether it was in just bearing us, or birthing us, or the way they, but, in this second time round with my little girl, Shemi, I've really been thinking about that disappearance and how it's like, wow, my mother did that. I didn't know, even if they go back to work, even if they're out there in the world or doing everything, there is a disappearance that has happened in order to just be able to birth. And it's just a very profound idea that you give up your existence, that you die on a certain level. Joseph Campbell talks about that psychological connection between begetting and dying, and I think the loneliness that I talk about, there's a lot of loneliness in this book as a defining quality about being a mother, even when you're surrounded by people. I think that is the disappearance that happens with any creation, whether you have children or not. To create, you have to die a little bit to allow something else to be the new, to allow something else to be born. So yeah, that theme comes over.
A good segue. I think a few questions speak about birthing and birthing your second child and your experience with Shemi, and whether a book will come out of that experience, whether there's more poetry around that contraction, so to speak.
Yeah, so Shemi was born 7 months ago, an extremely different experience apart from the fact that I was pregnant through lockdown. But at 20 weeks, she was diagnosed with a major life-threatening heart condition. So at birth, at 3 days old, she had to have open heart surgery. And it's funny, I had this fantasy that I would be writing all the time, just because I thought, what other way am I going to process the enormity of this? And I didn't write all the time at all. It was beyond even words, but I have this sense that it's coming. I think it's going to be a post, not in the present moment, a post sort of coming through. I'm still very much in the thick of, not in the thick, but I'm very much still in that experience of what has happened, and she's doing great. But piecing myself back together, trauma and the loss of things and the joy of her and the perfection. And I had to, through the pregnancy, speaking of that dying experience, I had to really befriend, make death a companion, in my pregnancy, which was extremely, not exactly how, pregnancies sold, to you, that's not normally what you'd be doing. You'd be, nesting and la, la, la. But that was my work. I had to, make death a companion, and it's still obviously her condition is a life condition, but her heart has been corrected, and she may never ever have one issue ever again. But we all know we're going to die. We all know there's death. But when something like that happens, it lodges in you in a different way. And death, you must make it a companion, not an enemy, because you can't actually survive the experience if you're shunning this, you know. So as far as that darker mother aspect that we were talking about, and the illuminated light and all these aspects, it has been really present for me. And actually, I don't know if you want, I know there's probably, but I do have one poem here that's never been heard.
We'd love it.
That I wrote.
With that. That's great, Jessie. Perfect.
Yeah. I actually, you know, I thought I'd written nothing, but I found this the other day, and it's based on an experience. You know, I was pregnant, 5 weeks pregnant, when I was in India last, so it was right before lockdown. And since I found out that it's in that 5-6 week mark that the heart is formed within baby. And, you know, I became obsessed throughout the pregnancy. Like, how did this happen? You know, there's no cause for this condition, but how did this happen? And maybe happened there in India. And, you know, anyway, this poem is based on that. When I fell on the steps of the garden of the divine, the heart of the baby inside me broke in two. But I didn't know that yet. Instead, I lay there, a limp heap, angels aghast, gathering by my side, while I looked over my shoulder, trying to keep my eyes on the mother. Can I see? I called out to her. And I did see. I could. I always would. But that afternoon, no one heard me, as my breathless little cry tumbled onto the grass, shriveling the open womb, the open blooms of the mother's fragrant flower bed. That's the one poem I have of my Shani experience and
the courage required.
Mama's garden. Back to the garden. We're always back in that garden.
Yeah. Jessie, thank you so much. There's a lot of love coming your way in our chat box, so make sure to take a look. Lots of appreciation for your deep and wise and raw and insightful and courageous words. There's a question about receiving the book in America. Is that an easy thing?
Worldwide shipping. I've sent many copies to America and all over the world. So just go to the link, which is mother-courage.com, and you can order it there and it'll be sent out.
Wonderful. Jessie, thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for being so honest and talking about the contradictions and the contractions and the light and the dark and the beauty of the dark. I want to wish you a happy Mother's Day. I want to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day, all the mothers, all the sisters, all the aunts, all the men, all the fathers.
And Mother India.
And Mother India. And that's why we're here. We're supporting Mother India. People are really suffering. We are donating to Amma's food programs. You have all the donation links. So please open your hearts and join us in supporting our brothers, our sisters, all the mothers in India who I think today and for the next few months are thinking solely about how to sustain their families, which is what mothers do.
Yes.
So thank you so much, everyone. The recording of this will be posted on Green Shakti Talks. We are all in the garden. Thank you for that reminder. Thank you, Jessie, for your beautiful wisdom and fearlessness.
And if anyone wants to be in a conversation, you can find me on Instagram. I'm seeing all these questions. I'm like, oh, I want to. You can find me, and I love talking about this. I think it involves all of us, this talk of mother. So feel free to write to me. I love hearing from everyone.
Thank you, Jessie. I look forward to
Sonya.
seeing you soon. Have a beautiful Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.